Hello everybody, welcome to the Gastric Mindset podcast. My name is Safi. I am 8 years post-op, a therapeutic practitioner with a focus on disordered eating pre and post-bariatric surgery. On this podcast, my aim is to vanish crappy fad dieting and unhelpful thinking to reclaim our mindset with a little rewiring so we can stop yo-yo dieting and get off the roller coaster once and for all. Welcome to season 2 with a new name and a new look. I have some great guests lined up who are experts in this area and will provide us with some great tips to build our own toolkit. I am passionate about making psychological support accessible for long-term success, both physically and emotionally. Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode. Today I want to tell you a bit about my story. I haven't shared my story and my reason for starting this podcast and my passion for working with the bariatric community. So I wanted to share a bit about myself, and then so you can have a better idea of who I am and why I do what I do. I'm gonna go back a little bit with my story. Some of it can be a bit, I don't think it's traumatizing or triggering, but there is some darker bits to my story. So keep yourself psychologically safe. And yeah. So, my name's Safi. I am the oldest of 7 children. And for the purpose of this podcast, I'm going to go back to myself as a 7-year-old. And as a 7-year-old, my family, my mother and my 3 sisters fled war in Somalia in the early 90s. Walked for nights through villages. It seemed like, from my memory, the war started overnight and we could hear gunshots and bombs going every night, sirens. It all felt really close. Overnight, we had to pack our bags and leave our home. We walked for what seemed like weeks, but possibly days, from one village to another. I was the oldest at 7, and everybody else was at least 2 years younger than me. So my poor mom would drag us, and I can't imagine how hard it must have been in the African sun to be dragging these 2 children. No, 3. I think it was 3 children at that time. And then she, obviously was scared every car that went by, so it must have been really, I can't imagine now being a parent. I can't imagine how distressing that situation must have been for my mother. But I remember a lot, and I remember seeing, people being dragged out of buses because they had the wrong dialect, and they were from the wrong tribe, and being persecuted. I remember lines of dead people on the side of the roads. So yeah, a lot of it was really distressing, especially for a young child that didn't fully understand what was going on. I think my weight issue started from that. I think it was having suddenly, going from, I guess we lived a quite normal life. We had food, and then being food desert, we didn't have any food. We struggled to have food. Days would go without having proper food. And I remember we were put in a refugee camp in Ethiopia, and we were once a day or twice a day, they would throw water and bread rolls at us, and people would grab, and there wasn't enough for us. And I think that was the first time I think that's the main trigger of going from not eating all day to grabbing a piece of bread and not having enough, to then being lucky enough to be rescued by the Red Cross and brought over to England. And then I joked that the first meal we had when we landed in East London was chips. Not any chips. And, if you're American, not crisp, chips. Like fat, English, British, seaside chips. And that hug and that potato and oil, and that was my first it was a party in my mouth. I started the wrong saying. But anyway, it just gave me this warm feeling. And I remembered that. And since then, me and potatoes and chips have been basically inseparable. I went through my childhood having food as the only thing that I enjoyed, the only thing that was my entertainment, the only thing that was guaranteed, the thing that was we didn't get toys, we didn't have any of that. So food was the one thing I looked forward to. I ran home, and then as family who were not, we were on benefits, and so it would mean we would have a lot of, you know, cheaper food to eat, a lot of carbohydrates, and my mom, who was a great cook, would also brought her culture of fresh, loads of meat, a lot of what they would eat, especially in the village or in the farming community, who would spend the whole day out in the sun, sweating it all off. Suddenly, we were in a house in East London, and my mum and dad were petrified that we were going to get kidnapped because they heard a story that people got kidnapped. I don't know where the story came from, but anyway, so they were everything was scary to them. They didn't understand the language. They were in a foreign land. Everybody looked different. We looked different. We sounded different. And then I started the schooling system. At 8 years old, I would have probably been about maybe year five or so. Would have meant that I missed out on all the formative years of education. And then on top of that, I was later diagnosed to have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and so on. So I spent years just at school, hating school because I struggled so much. I struggled. I didn't know how to read or write into my secondary years. Or I can even perhaps, so, maybe in my early 20s, I still really, really struggled. And don't get me wrong, I still struggle. And if you listen to my podcast, I beautifully, I'm constantly butchering names. And yeah, and that's me. And I've come to terms with that now. And, but for a lot of years, I had a lot of shame around it. I struggled with it. And then I developed childhood obesity. And, I think a lot of people wouldn't be surprised because my body, now knowing what I know about biology, my body would have, wanting to obviously store every piece, anything that I could get in case I went back into that environment where food was, scarce. Oh, there was food famine, there was food insecurity. My mother struggled with her mental health, which I'm not surprised about. So, being the oldest of 7 children, I had to grow up very fast. I would have to cook for my siblings. I would make a lot of chips. Until this day, I tell everybody this story. I could, nobody could beat me in peeling potatoes. I am so fast at peeling potatoes that actually one day I will give the Guinness World Book of Records, right? A call to just, to enter me on as the fastest potato peeler. Anyway, I digress. So that was the case. So I struggled with food, and I remember my teacher saying to me, "Oh, I saw you from the other building, and you were eating crisp. What must have been like 10 to 9 or something, and you had crisp in both pockets." And that was my day, and especially secondary school. The good old days where there was, I don't know, I enjoyed it at the time where we had vending machines. I would go to the corner shop. I would get all the junk. So at home, we didn't have a lot of, junk food, but when I was outside, I had it, and I, very much have a addictive personality, and the sugar and the salt and made me happy. It gave me, and I guess now knowing what I know is that it was my first coping mechanism. It was the one, and I was a child. That's all I had accessible to me. And I know I have that in common with a lot of people that struggle with childhood obesity and, obesity as they go into their adult years. I I continue to just, gain. And then I discovered weight loss clubs. I don't know how I discovered them. I don't know, my mom didn't take me. I didn't, well, I found, I don't know, maybe perhaps I worked in a care home and there was a lot of older women on these diets. And then I started my journey of, off a diet, on a diet, off the wagon, Monday start, food funeral, how many sins did you have? I had, so I took part in that. I really enjoyed attending the groups. They were great. They gave me sense of community. I was the only overweight one in my friendship group. So meeting these women who were quite maternal, older women in these clubs, it was nice. I felt a sense of community, and I still that's very much something that I know what I need, and something that's very important to me is community. And I had that in those clubs. However, it was detrimental, and then I graduated to more and more, let's say extreme versions of the diet. So I would figure out how to use Google. So I would Google everything, and I would start the military diet, this diet, that diet. I did Lighter Life, which I was pretty successful at, and then graduated to Cambridge because it was just a little bit cheaper, and then I would never be able to do long enough to be able to get to where I needed to, and then I would always regain the weight. That pattern continued. I would then, the more money I was earning, the more extreme or the more obscure or the more weirder that the diets that I was accessing got. So I found out that there's people in Harley Street, and I thought, well, Harley Street, of course, they've got the answer, right? So in this particular diet, I had a NG tube down my nose, and it was pumping protein liquid. And if anybody else out there has done that diet, please send me a message, because I don't know anybody else. I know a couple of ladies that I'm still in touch with who'd done it with me, but and you just had to walk around with this almost, it was a rucksack full of liquid, and it was pumping through my nose straight to my stomach. And at that point my mom got sick with pneumonia, and it was this, I must have looked really sick, or obviously they thought I was a patient. They wouldn't actually let me in to the visitors canteen because I wasn't going to eat anyway, but they thought I was a patient, so they said no patients allowed. So, well, I'm not a patient. And they looked at me absolutely astonished why I was saying I'm not a patient when I have this tube, you know, down my nose. Yeah, and that was really difficult, and that didn't last for long. It led to me seeing floaters in my eyes and colours and going to the eye hospital thinking I was going blind. It was just my blood sugar was dropping. Anyway, so obviously that didn't work out. That was just, money down the drain. And I went back to the drawing board and tried some more crazy diets. I think most extreme was eating maybe grapes for a whole week, I think, possibly. Yeah, so I did loads of horrendous things. I would do trigger warning. I would look up some anacytes and all shenanigans like that. And then I think my fast forward till about possibly 2013, my heaviest possibly heading to 19 stones. I got sciatica. My mobility was getting really restricted, and life was getting really difficult. So then I decided to go and see my GP. Just say to him, I've tried this diet, that diet, this diet, this diet, this diet. Nothing's helping. What should I do? And then he gave me antidepressants and told me to eat less and move more. And I felt so alone. I felt so shamed by him. The look that he gave me, or the way he looked at me, rather, said a lot. He didn't need to say anything really. He barely, he thought I was just wasting his time. Why was I there? Why don't I just stop being greedy and go and move more? And then I remember, we were all joked about, oh, I need to go and get my mouth stapled. Or I can't remember if anybody actually ever stapled your mouth together. I don't know if that was ever a weight loss solution or weight loss procedure that anybody did. But I started Googling, as you do, and oh, I realized I can go and get a weight loss surgery. I decided to get gastric band. Purely, it was cheaper, and also I knew I wanted family. I wanted children. I wanted to be pregnant, and I just wasn't sure what the impact of having any of the other procedures would be if I had weight loss. If I felt pregnant. Anyway, I looked around, I found a surgeon in Belgium. It was a lot cheaper than the UK, but he was registered within the UK, so I felt safe. The procedure happened really quickly. They had a clinic in Harder Street. I met up with them, and then I was booked before you know it. Within 2 weeks, I had the surgery. All went well at the beginning. I lost weight. I could walk. It was almost, I think, with that first few days of losing that first stone or so, it made such a big difference to my back. I'm guessing there was a nerve that was trapped. I could walk, and then I got pregnant. As soon as I got pregnant, now before that, let's just go back a little bit. It would be too tight. They'll put liquid. If you don't know anything about gastric bands, they don't do them very much now, but they used to have to put liquid in to make it tighter. So it was a slow process. So I would go and get liquid, and then I wouldn't be able to swallow my own saliva. So then they'll have to empty it. And for this luxury, I will pay £80 every time I did that. And then anyway, I got pregnant and everything was fine. But then I realized actually I had a beautiful newborn, but I was still so occupied mentally by weight loss. I was still obsessing over Pinterest. I was still spending hours and hours instead of enjoying my newborn. Obsessed about, and I realized, and before this, I was a qualified social worker, working within people who've had addictions, mental health. So I realized, something, I don't know, something clicked that there's more to this than just, you eat too much. And then that's the journey I started on. I listened to podcasts, I read books. I tried to find a therapist that specialized in bariatric surgery. I couldn't find one. So I went to look for books. I realized actually weight loss surgery by itself, the fact that you fix your stomach or lost ability, it doesn't really mean anything. Really, in the big scheme of things, you're still going back to the same environment, you're still going back to the same stresses, you're still going back to the same life, and you have not changed. I had not changed or learned any new coping mechanism. I hadn't done any work on my self-esteem, on my people pleasing. I hadn't dealt with dieting trauma. I hadn't dealt with that. I still had that very critical inner voice that was shaming me all the time. I was hanging about a lot on Facebook within the Bariatric community, and that was rife. We were all, everybody was busy shaming themselves and shaming each other. And so with that all said, I then decided I was gonna go, and my acid got really bad to the extent that I had to sleep sitting up. I could have swallowed my saliva then, and just after 2 pregnancies, the band I could not get to a comfortable stage to lose that final bit of weight. And that wasn't important because at this point I got to a stage where I was, quite comfortable 14. I was, pregnancies went really well. I was happy. But the acid was so bad. Everything got stuck. I couldn't eat anything decent because as soon as I touched anything with texture, it would get stuck and I would vomit. My doctor told me that I was at risk of esophageal cancer. And then I decided to go and get a mini gastric bypass. One of the best decisions I made because I no longer live with constant vomiting, constant fear of, if I was to eat out, where would I go throw up if it got stuck? I don't have this feeling of just something stuck in my chest 24/7, which is brilliant. But I eventually found a therapist. I did some therapy around my childhood trauma. I did some work around, and then I had a specialist who specialized in bariatric surgery. And I now, with all that said, I now live a life where I don't weigh myself. I haven't weighed myself in years now. I don't calorie count. I do none of that. I've got to a place where I trust my body and my body trusts me. I don't have food anxiety. I rarely ever have food noise. I don't have the mental gymnastics of debating whether to start today and then breaking it by 10 a.m. and then planning tomorrow, and every night and every day, every morning being about, reflection on how much I failed and shaming myself and then making a new plan and getting excited and living that cycle. I now thrive. I think I'm somebody in remission. I very much believe food was my chosen drug. I very much believe that, my journey has been, it's just strangers on the internet, amazing podcasts, amazing books has changed my life. And I am able to do wonderful things and have confidence that I've never had, self esteem that I've never had, and self worth. And wonderful things I can do now is actually I have space in my head that was occupied by diet, occupied by the way I look, debating whether everybody was staring at me, whether to go and do or go somewhere or do whatever it may be. With all that now quieting down, I'm able to have space to do amazing things and have guts to do things like create a podcast, go back and retrain as a therapist, go and I'm currently writing a book. As a dyslexic person, Safi 5 years ago would have never dared to have, I would have never, audacity to write a book. I was my worst critic. My self-esteem was so low. I now love connecting with people. I connect with a lot of you, and I am I'm a better mom. I am a better human for it. I don't, because I'm kind to myself and I don't judge myself so harshly. I look at myself and treat myself with great compassion. I'm able to do that for other people. I've always been an empath. I've always been a people person. I've always worked with people, the most vulnerable in society. I've worked with, from kids in care to people struggling with addictions, poor mental health, domestic abuse. I've always worked with people, and I've always enjoyed. I've always been, I guess I've always been a people person, but I now put myself first. I now make sure that my mask is on. I know my self-worth. It's not about, I don't need the validation. I needed to have a conference. The amount, I don't know if anybody resonates with me with this, but the amount of WhatsApp groups I've started in order to be able to do a new diet, hoping somebody else will have the answer, or them being there will make me do what I know to do. I've lost count. I've always wanted for somebody to tell me what to do. And I'm breaking that habit and learning that everything's a habit, and the amazing functions of our brain and neuroplasticity and how habits are learned and how they can be unlearned and how you can become who you want to become is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And I'm so, so grateful for every book I've read, for every person I've spoken to, for every talk I've listened to. And I hope to be that for other people. And I hope if you're listening to this podcast feeling overwhelmed, feeling alone, feeling like, why can't you do what you know? And why are you the only person that's failing when everybody else seems to be, have it worked out? Number one, nobody really has anything worked out. I found that very, very freeing. Everybody's just trying to do their best, and that's okay. And you are valuable as you are. You are, we all try to function in this condition that's called life and being human, and we don't know really. Nobody's got it sorted out. And I think for a long time I thought everybody else but me had it sussed out. And I really hope that you get from my podcast what I got from other people's podcasts, and you are able to go and have space to chase your dreams and not let food occupy your every waking moment. I hope that you are brave enough to know that there is another way, there's another road, there's another destiny. And I hope in a world that's obsessed, in a community, I'm calling out our community that's obsessed with, what I think is basically just, an undercover dieting mentality of, pouch resets, obsession with protein, obsession with calorie counting, wanting to return back to where a diet industry. I think things like even fitness pal, I think those just things that are just in plain sight, but still as harmful as fad diets. And they do more harm to people who struggle with deeper rooted issues regarding food. I definitely struggled with binge eating. If anybody ever didn't, nobody ever talked to me about it. So if you do think there's something deeper going on here, then please go and get support. So that is my story. I want to share it because I think it's important, and I hope it makes somebody feel that you're not alone, that there is light. If you're struggling, there's always light. If the food noise is really loud, go and get support, because you're not alone. We fixed our stomach, but nobody did anything to our brain. And what is your relationship with food? What's your relationship with yourself? What's your relationship with people around you? What's your relationship with your job? We're human with so many different dimensions, and all that needs to be taken into consideration. And I know it's very important to stay hydrated, make sure you're having your protein and your vitamins. But beyond that, there's also so much more that you need to explore to have true freedom from your dieting, from the stigma of having struggled with obesity for many years. So I wish you all the success. I hope you find my podcast helpful. I hope you feel that we are a community. I hope you find comfort in my words and what everybody, in all the stories that everybody else shares. Thank you. I hope that was helpful. And I don't tell you my story for, sympathy. I tell you my story because I've gone through that, but I feel that I've come out the other side stronger. I've learned so much about myself through this journey. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next week. I appreciate you for being here with me. I hope you got some value from this episode. If so, please give me a review. It will make me super happy and support others from our community to find the podcast. Share it with your Bari bestie. Connect with me on Instagram at Gastric Mindset. It'll be wonderful to hear from you.